Hello, this is again Dr. Jonathan Bentwich, and I'm recording another very important presentation. This one is entitled The New Solar Eclipse of the 21st Century. And it's very important because we stand now at the turning point in physics, in theoretical physics, and in fact in the development of science. 100 years ago, just over 100 years ago, Albert Einstein, considered to be one of the two greatest scientists that the world has ever known, Albert Einstein called astronomers, cosmologists, to test one of his critical predictions for his new, back then it was the new paradigm for physics, for 20th century physics, of relativity theory, general relativity theory. And Einstein called astronomers and cosmologists to test one of those unique critical predictions that his general relativity theory had. That unique prediction had to do with the curvature, the double value of the curvature of Mercury's perihelion pathway around the Sun. According to general relativity theory, massive objects curve space and time, and therefore the mass of the Sun curves space-time around it. And one of the unique critical predictions of Einstein's back then new paradigm for physics, at the beginning of the turn of the last century, 20th century physics, there was a shift from Newtonian mechanics, classical mechanics, to the new paradigm. Right now it's an old paradigm, but back then it was a new paradigm of Einstein's general relativity theory. And so I'm calling this article one of 17 plus articles that have been published right now, recently over the last month, in an international scientific journal dedicated to the new paradigm of 21st century physics, which is God's physics, the theory that I discovered over the last 10 years. Over 60 peer-reviewed scientific articles have been written and published. 2 special issues have been published, one recently with 17 breakthrough articles, a few books, including a recent book by the name of God's Physics, published by iUniverse.com. And so this theory is now becoming more and more, is viewed increasingly as the new paradigm for 21st century, which is the title of the special issue that was just published, God's Physics New 21st Century Paradigm. And interestingly, so one of those 17 articles that have been published recently in the second special issue about the new paradigm of physics in the 21st century, which is God's physics paradigm. Previously, this theory has been called the computational flight field theory, in respect of Einstein's bold seeking of a unifying field theory, which could unify between relativity theory about the universe, the galaxies, the macroscopic scale, and quantum mechanics, which is the microscopic realm of subatomic particles. And these two pillars of 20th century, what I called the old material causal paradigm, they seem to collide, they seem to be inconsistent theoretically. And there's a major phenomenon which is called, or major unresolved phenomenon, which is the accelerated expansion of the universe. The universe is expanding at an accelerated rate, and the only way that the old model, that old material causal model of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, can try to explain that accelerated expansion of the rate of the universe, is by assuming that there exist purely hypothetical concepts of dark matter and dark energy. Dark matter, dark energy now for 2 decades have been sought for. Numerous experiments have been carried out, and to date, no direct proof for the existence of this dark matter, dark energy have actually been obtained. So we now stand at a point that is very similar to where Einstein was standing when he came out with his relativity theory and then general relativity theory. And in fact, as I said, just 100 years ago, Einstein was calling for astronomers and cosmologists to test a critical prediction, one prediction wherein his theory, general relativity theory, would predict something which is quite different than what Newtonian mechanics, classical mechanics, which was the older paradigm, predicts. And specifically in the case of Mercury's perihelion pathway value, curvature value, Einstein predicted 1.6 arc and Newton predicted 0.8. So Einstein predicted the value of the curvature of Mercury's perihelion around the sun, which is double the value of Newton. And then came along, Einstein was calling astronomers, cosmologists to test that critical prediction, because they understood that once that critical prediction would be verified, because his theory predicts something which is very different than what Newtonian mechanics predicted, that would be a clear-cut evidence that Einstein's theory is more valid than Newtonian mechanics. And in fact, Newtonian mechanics became a special case within the broader generalization of Einstein's general relativity theory. And it's important for us to know that Einstein himself, the great scientist, when he was asked, what do you think would be the fate of your relativity theory in 100 years from the time that he discovered it, he said, they asked him, do you think that it would hold true forever? It would be the ultimate theory. There would be no progression beyond relativity theory. And Einstein, being a great scientist and a very humble scientist and human being, said, no, I do not think it would hold forever. In 100 years, I only hope that relativity theory, general relativity theory, would become a special case within a broader generalization, broader theoretical framework, just as Newtonian mechanics became a special case within Einstein's broader general relativity theory. And so the reason that I wrote this article, which is titled "The New Solar Eclipse of 21st Century Physics," is that is God's physics, a new theory for the 21st century, and the solar eclipse, the new solar eclipse, meaning a new way, a new critical prediction, just as Einstein verified. Eddington, actually, the famous British astronomer, actually tested Einstein's prediction during the solar eclipse of 1919. And during that solar eclipse, there was a possibility of measuring the Mercury's perihelion's pathway around the sun and the value of that orbit. And so the new solar eclipse is what I'm calling now astronomers and cosmologists to carry out an equivalent measurement. It's not really a solar eclipse, but metaphorically, it's the new solar eclipse of this century. Why? Because by testing this empirical critical prediction of the new God's physics paradigm for 21st century physics, by testing that critical prediction, which again I'm calling it the new solar eclipse, because we need to test a critical prediction which would be equivalent to what Einstein did then, what Eddington did then during the solar eclipse. So the new solar eclipse, quote unquote, would be testing God's physics critical prediction, which is different, significantly different than the predictions of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. So let me walk you through what that means. And again, I'm calling again and again now, because it's a very special time, it's a very precious time. In about a month from now, on the 7th and 8th of September 2021, during the 2 days of the Jewish Rosh-Hashana New Year, I'm calling astronomers, cosmologists to test prior to that date, these 2 days special time interval. So before the 7th and 8th of September, ideally at least 2 weeks before that, so from the 15th of August or thereabout until the 7th and 8th of September, during the 7th and 8th of September, the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, and after the 7th and 8th of September, maybe also another 2-3 weeks. And the critical prediction of God's physics paradigm, which I will explain in a second, essentially says that if and when astronomers, cosmologists would test the rate of expansion of the universe before September 7th and 8th, during September 7th and 8th, and after September 7th and 8th of 2021, they would find, that's a prediction of God's physics new paradigm, they would find that from the 7th, 8th of September 2021 and following subsequently that after that, there would be a non-continuous leap, an increase in the rate of the universe's expansion. So if we compare, when astronomers and cosmologists would test and measure what's the rate of acceleration of the universe before the 7th and 8th, and then what happens on the 7th and 8th, which the prediction is there will be a leap, there will be an increase, a non-continuous leap or increase in the rate of the universe's expansion. So if the rate was x before the 7th and 8th. During the 7th and 8th of September 2021, it would be x plus I. It would be an increase which would carry on beyond the 7th and 8th of September 2021. So that's the critical prediction, and that would be the new solar eclipse measurement, so to speak, of this 21st century, and it may very well bring a paradigmatic shift, an acceptance of the scientific community across the board that God's physics, or the computational unified field theory, which I called it before, following Einstein's seeking a unifying field theory. He preceded his age, and I called my theory initially the computational unified field theory. Now it's been termed the God's physics paradigm. But by testing the prediction of God's physics new paradigm of an increase, a non-continuous increase in the rate of acceleration of the universe from the 7th, 8th of September and following and subsequently, as compared to what happens before the 7th and 8th of September 2021, if in fact the value of the universe's expansion rate would increase non-continuously during the 7th, 8th and subsequently, that would constitute an unequivocal support and validation of God's physics being the new paradigm, scientific paradigm for the 21st century. And that would be equivalent to Einstein's solar eclipse verification, 1919 solar eclipse verification by Eddington of general relativity theory, also by testing a unique critical prediction of back then the new paradigm, which was relativity theory, relative to back then the older paradigm of Newtonian mechanics. Now let me explain briefly how is this possible, or what's the difference between the prediction of God's physics paradigm, which again is talking about a non-continuous increase during Jewish Rosh Hashana, but by the way, that would be a special case there's other time intervals in which it's possible at least to measure this non-continuous increase in the universe's expansion rate. But let me explain what's happening. The old paradigm, I call it the material causal paradigm. That's the paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And that old paradigm, the reason I call it, or I termed it the material causal paradigm, is because the basic assumption underlying relativity theory and quantum mechanics is a material causal assumption. There's an assumption that everything in the universe, whether at the macroscopic relativistic level of the galaxies and the Big Bang model, or whether it's in the subatomic realm of quantum mechanics, subatomical particles, the basic assumption is a material causal assumption. That's of the old 20th century material causal paradigm. And what does that mean, material causal assumption? Or why is this paradigm called material causal paradigm? Because the basic assumption is that anything in the universe, any physical system, any physical effect, any physical phenomena, anything happening in the universe, again at the microscopic scale or microscopic scale, can be explained purely and merely through interactions between X and Y, between certain elements, material elements. As an example, relativity theory tells us that the universe was created by a Big Bang nuclear event. Supposedly, at the beginning of the universe, at the onset of the universe, there was a Big Bang nuclear event that caused the creation of mass, energy, suns, galaxies, planets, etc. Plants and planets, stars, etc. This is the assumption, the material causal assumption, which essentially tells us that anything in the universe happens by a cause and effect. There was a Big Bang nuclear event that created space-time, energy, mass, stars, galaxies, planets, etc. At the microscopic level, again, quantum mechanics tells us if you want to observe any particle, any target particle, you'd have to have an interaction between that target element particle, which is assumed to also exist be dispersed along a probability wave function, and then you'd have a probe element, subatomical element, that would interact with that target's assumed probability wave function. That would cause the collapse of the probability wave function, and the target would then be measured as a single complementary energy, space, time, mass complementary value. Again, cause and effect. So the way you explain the universe, and by the way, the same thing about general relativity theory, not just the Big Bang model, but the way the universe evolves and the dynamics by which the universe is accelerated and expanding is by massive objects curving space and time then determining the traveling pathways of massive and less massive objects. So it's all a cause and effect, material causal interactions. That's the old paradigm. The new paradigm has made a huge leap by discovering, right now hypothesizing, postulating, and it has various measurements, various critical predictions that can actually verify that that's the case. So the new paradigm has discovered the existence of a hypothetical, higher ordered, singular universal computational or consciousness principle. And that singular higher ordered universal computational principle is producing simultaneously the whole universe. So that's an acausal computational principle. And in fact, the new paradigm is talking about acausal computation. And so in order to explain this new paradigm of science, essentially it's saying that the universe is not interacting by material causal effects between massive objects and space-time, etc., but rather the universe is functioning based on this universal computational principle that's simultaneously producing the whole universe. Now, to explain why, in a sense, the old model, the prediction of the old model is now under question, to explain that,